Greetings. Welcome to the Revelations of Life channel. I invite you to dive into a new heartfelt and true story. Share your story in the comments and it will be shared in the next video. After finishing his coffee, Sergey Ivanovich began to get ready for work. He was a leading surgeon in their clinic. In addition, he held the position of deputy chief physician. He was also called a healer of human souls. After all, he gave all of himself for the salvation of patients. But at the same time, he couldn't save his own marriage from ruin. His wife left him for a rich businessman, and the most offensive thing was that it turned out to be his best friend, with whom they had grown up together all their childhood. My wife Olga had been disappearing from the house more and more lately. She explained that she had important things to do. She worked as a masseuse in an elite salon and naturally served rich clients. Sergey's friend Boris frequented the salon, and he had his eye on Olga, and soon he seemed to be courting her. They hid their relationship until the very last, until Sergey found out himself. That day was fatal for him. His faith in women faded. It was hard for him to realize that his wife was cheating, and with his best friend. The surgeon did not make a scene of jealousy, he just gave his wife the right to choose. She did, but before doing so, she accused Sergey of childlessness, as if he was to blame for the fact that she had to sleep with another man. They were divorced after 2 weeks, and Sergey was left to live alone in the apartment. True, he had a cat, Leopold, which he had found on the street 3 years ago. It was soaking in the rain, huddled against the wall of the house near the entrance. Sergey then returned from a night shift and, seeing the poor animal, leaned over it to pet it. The cat pressed even harder against the wall, but did not hiss. "Well, come here. Don't be afraid," Sergey said and took the cat in his arms. He shook like a leaf on the wind, but as soon as he was in warmth, he purred. Sergey brought the poor fellow home, washed and fed him. The wife, however, negatively reacted to the new member of the family. "Not enough for you sick patients, but you also bring infectious cats into the house." Sergey left the cat alone and even gave him a new name, Leopold, after letting his wife's reproaches pass his ears. He remembered the cartoon about the cheerful and kind cat who constantly tamed negligent mice. Gradually, Leopold got accustomed and was not afraid to go out in the street again. The first time he did not dare to do so, probably thinking that they would not let him back. Sergey let him know that this was his home now too. And now, as usual, getting ready for work, the surgeon stroked Leopold and said, "You stay for the master in the apartment, keep order." The cat sagged manically, as if with all his appearance made it clear that in his absence, nothing will happen. Closing the door behind him, Sergey went downstairs to the car and drove out of the yard. On the way, he remembered his wife's words about being childless again and smiled. He didn't have a problem with it. It was just that Olga had made it up to get away. Apparently, she had been planning to do it for a long time, just looking for a reason. At the same time, he was trying to make sense of himself. Sergey wondered the same thing. Maybe I did something wrong. But there was no answer, and neither was whether Olga loved him. After all, she kept her feelings deep in her soul, and Sergey never once saw her calling him anything affectionately or sincerely smiling. On the contrary, all her facial expressions were false and strained. It was as if she was forcing herself to be a loving and faithful wife. As a result, the work of a surgeon for Sergey became the meaning of his whole life. He couldn't live a day without saving people. Even when he was at home, he received messages and calls from grateful patients. They praised him for his professionalism and responsiveness. The staff of the clinic treated him with the same reverence. Besides him, there were several other surgeons, but Sergey Ivanovich was considered the best. Pulling up to the building, he could barely find a place to park the car. There were a line of foreign cars, and not the cheapest ones. It seemed that the new rich patients, for whom the rules are not written, had arrived. Intending to scold the guards for allowing such a relaxation, Sergey began to climb the stairs, and then his eyes fell on the dog, who was sitting on the cold concrete. It was drizzling rain, and the dog, quite wet, shrank back in order to keep warm as long as possible. It was unclear what breed he was, or if he was a thoroughbred at all. The dog had dirt all over its fur, as if it had been wallowing in it on purpose. Shaking his head, Sergei walked inside the hall and approached the receptionist. "Good morning, Tamara Mikhailovna," he said to the nurse on duty. "Good morning, Sergei Ivanovich," she replied. "And they're already waiting for you in the waiting room." "Okay, I'll take a look," Sergei answered. "But explain to me why we have a dog under the clinic door." "You know, he's probably waiting for his master," answered the nurse uncertainly. "What do you mean waiting?" Sergei asked. "Can't the relatives pick him up? Maybe the owner will come down and solve this problem." "He won't come down anymore," answered her colleague again uncertainly. "Tamara Mikhailovna, either you start answering normally or I will make you take the dog home. Choose." Sergei got angry and tapped his finger on the transparent glass. Yes, I understand you, Sergei Ivanovich. The thing is that the owner of the dog is no longer alive. He died in our clinic, and I know nothing about it." The surgeon was indignant. "Sergei Ivanovich, Timur Petrovich told me not to tell anyone about it," pleaded the nurse, looking at him with guilty eyes. "That's the news. The new surgeon is in charge of everything and everyone," said Sergei, loudly tapping on the table. "Okay, I will deal with him. And now tell me more about what happened to the dog's owner and what kind of person he is." "He came to us 3 days ago, or rather, barely crawled up to the porch and collapsed," began to tell the nurse. "We took the old man to the clinic, and he turned out to be having a heart attack. Timur Petrovich was on duty then. He tried to save my grandfather. And he had no documents, no money, not even normal clothes. In general, save the homeless man failed, he died, and the dog remained sitting on the porch and waiting for the owner. It's strange, it has been 3 days, and the dog still does not leave," said aloud Sergei. "Doesn't he understand that he no longer has a master? So he's a dog, how can he have sense?" said the nurse. "You have a problem with it, but animals understand everything," objected the surgeon. "Feed the dog, maybe it will really go away. It will not sit here forever. By the way, what about that homeless guy? He, as I said, had no documents, no money, and no relatives, by the looks of it," answered the nurse. "He was buried at the expense of the city budget. Timur Petrovich arranged it." Sergei nodded in response and headed up the steps to the second floor. That was where the office of the new surgeon was located. He had just recently come to work in this clinic and already set himself above all other employees. Knocked on the solid wooden door, Sergei, without waiting for an answer, opened it himself. "Hello, Sergei Ivanovich." Greeted him, the owner of the office. "Is something wrong, since you came to me with such a threatening look on your face?" "Hello, Timur Petrovich." Sergei answered the greeting. "And you have no idea." "I'm a surgeon, not a fortune teller," he replied sarcastically. "I'm interested in the patient who passed away 3 days ago. I'm interested in the patient who died 3 days ago. He had no documents, but he had a dog that was still waiting for him." "Ah, you mean this stray?" Timur Petrovich mouthed. "So he died of a heart attack. You know, I did everything I could, but the old man could not be saved, even about the funeral arranged." "I know, but what I'm interested in is why you didn't say anything. If you remember, the deputy chief physician is standing in front of you. If he's not there, you have to tell me everything." "Next time I will do so, when another homeless person appears," again replied Timur Petrovich slyly. "It's not often that homeless people visit our clinic, so I have to improvise." "All right, I heard you," concluded their conversation Sergei. "And while you are suspended from conducting operations." "Why is that?" Timur Petrovich became indignant. "You couldn't save a man," Sergei answered. "And it does not matter that he was homeless, he also had the right to life." "But I told you that in his case, there were no options." Timur Petrovich continued to be indignant, not understanding why he had been suspended. "Yes, you said that. So, in your case, too, no options," said Sergei reasonably, and slammed the door loudly, leaving his office. 10 minutes later, he was at his workplace. He had several patients to see, and first of all, those who were preparing for planned and emergency surgery. With them, Sergei communicated first and gave the appropriate orders. At the same time, the fault on his mind never went away. Why are we so unfair to people? Sergei reasoned to himself that some may provide a full range of medical services and some elementary and cannot save or just do not want to. And the case of the homeless man clearly showed what kind of attitude medical professionals have toward this category of people. Timur Petrovich, in Sergei's opinion, acted negligently. He did not make a fuss about the operation, although it was possible at that time. He didn't want to, and in the end the man died, even though he was homeless. True, the dog was left, which, if not helped, also risked to share the fate of its deceased owner. Going through these thoughts in his head, Sergei suddenly imagined Leopold. He too could have perished if he had not picked him up. After lunch, Sergei had some free time, and he went down to the reception. There sat another nurse who replaced Tamara Mikhailovna. Approaching the window, the surgeon cautiously asked, "Irina Viktorovna, what about the dog?" "What dog, Sergei Ivanovich?" "Incomprehensible," asked the nurse, but then she realized. "Oh, you mean the dog that has been sitting on the porch all day?" "Well, yes, I asked Tamara Mikhailovna in the morning to feed him," replied the surgeon. "Yes, she brought him food in a bowl," said the nurse. "He ate it all and ran away." "Are you sure about that?" asked the surgeon. "Sure, you can see for yourself," replied the nurse. Just in case, Sergei went out on the porch and made sure that the dog was really gone. It seemed that the dog realized that the owner would be gone and left his post. However, the surgeon did not believe that the dog would just run away like that. He knew from the example of his cat that animals will wait for their owners until the last moment. Many waited for years, grew wild, and would not let anyone near them. And then he ran away. No, there was something wrong. During the day, Sergei had several surgeries and a couple of consultations. With a heavy look, he closed his office in the evening. After he dismissed Timur Petrovich from the operations, the latter took offense at him and spent a whole day in the therapeutic department, not to confront him. But his thoughts now were not about this arrogant surgeon and why the dog ran away. Apparently, something clicked inside him to feel sorry for the poor dog. After closing the office, Sergei went downstairs, gave the keys to the nurse, and left the clinic. And what was his surprise when he again saw the familiar dog? It was sitting on the porch, only at the very beginning. "Hey, you poor thing, come here," he decided to call the dog. The dog did not react in any way, just looked at him sideways. Sergei took the remains of a sandwich out of a plastic container. "Here, have some food," he put in front of the dog and walked away to a safe distance. Barely keeping on his skinny paws, the dog came to the container and took out first the bread and then the sausage and cheese. Sergei kept his distance and let the dog finish his meal. The dog gobbled down the sandwich and approached him. An awkward situation arose. Sergei did not know what the dog would do now, but judging by his gaze, he was not going to grow or lunge. On the contrary, the dog gently licked his hand. Sergei staggered slightly from surprise because he was afraid that the dog might bite him. He is a cat lover. "Wow, you are not such a wild dog," said the surgeon and began to call the dog after himself. It stood motionless for a few minutes, but then moved and wandered towards Sergei. The surgeon opened the car door in front of him, and the dog jumped in easily. It felt as if this was not the first time he had been in the cabin of a car. This suggested that the dead owner was not homeless at all. But then, why didn't he have any identification? A strange question that Sergei had no answer to yet. "Well, now we're friends," said the surgeon as the car started up. The dog obediently lay down on the seat and closed his eyes. Apparently, he realized that he was not in danger and quietly fell asleep. Sergei looked at the dog the whole way, trying to figure out what kind of breed it was. The layer of dirt made it impossible to make exact conclusions, but it was clear that it was not a mongrel. And then the question arose, where did the homeless man get a purebred dog? Could he have bought it himself, or maybe stolen it? So many questions arose at once, and it was impossible to answer them yet. The surgeon reached the house, where Leopold the cat was already waiting for him. And as soon as the door opened, the woolly pet rushed to his feet. But then he jumped away when he saw the dog. "Don't swear, Leo. This is our new pet," said Sergei affectionately, soothing the disheveled cat. Leopold snarled a little more for the sake of decorum and ran into the kitchen. He knew his master would be getting dressed by now and would come to feed him. Sergei made a detour, stopping by the bathroom to clean the dog. The dog didn't hesitate to get under the running water and waited patiently for the dirt to come off. After combing out the tattered hair, Sergei took a picture on his phone and checked online to see what kind of breed it was. It turned out that in front of him, no other than Border Collie. "See that? A real Scottish," said Sergei admiringly. In the meantime, Leopold came into the bathroom. The cat watched as the owner washed some shaggy creature. "Look, Leo, what a beautiful dog," Sergei pointed at him. "Wait, what is that?" On his neck, under the thick fur, glittered a bracelet. In addition, it was bundled with a leather collar. But because of the dirt, Sergei could not see anything. Now, it was possible to read the name of the dog. "So your name is Roy." "Great. At least I do not have to think up a new name." There were some numbers next to the dog's name. They looked a lot like a telephone number. Sergei carefully took off the bracelet and collar and wrote down all the data in his notebook. A little information cleared up, and now the dog no longer seemed like a stray dog. Wiping his wet coat, Sergei noticed the scar on his belly. "What is that?" The dog squirmed and whimpered, and Sergei had to calm him down to see the scar better. By the nature of the furrows, it was possible to judge about the knife wound. Someone had stabbed the dog, but a miracle had happened and it had survived. Strangely enough, where did the homeless man get it from? After all, he did not have a phone with him, so the number on the bracelet belonged to the real owner. Sergei thought about what to do and decided to let Roy stay with him for a couple of days. He had to give him a chance to come to his senses and then look for an owner. Interestingly enough, the dog accepted his homemade food without complaint and immediately settled down beside the couch. As it was, he repeated the actions he had done in the present owner's dwelling. The cat surgeon's insides rattled, and he realized that perhaps the owner was now suffering and waiting for his pet to be found. The next day, he was going to call the number and make an appointment. But his plans were thwarted by his ex-wife, who dropped by unexpectedly. She had forgotten some documents and decided to check on her ex-husband. Seeing the dog, in addition to the cat, Olga, laughing, said, "God, Sergei, you haven't changed a bit. First you brought that cat, and now the dog." "And hello to you, Olya," Sergei replied. "I thought you came for the documents. So do me a favor, take the papers and go away." "Sure, of course, Sergei," seriously muttered ex-wife. "I just want to admire the fact that you have a family." Sergei looked at her angrily, struck his fist on the table. This had the desired effect on Olga, and she began to gather the documents. Putting a bundle of papers in her purse, she went out into the hallway. "I would like to point out, Sergei, the dog is a pedigree." "I know," replied the surgeon. "And why did you decide to have a border collie in your house?" "It's none of your business." She took the papers and good riddance. Olga immediately rushed out of the apartment, and she met Sergei's colleague at work. "Matvey, what for? Come on." He smiled at the assistant from the other shift and showed him into the kitchen. "Yes, I thought I'd pay you a visit," Matvey replied. "Irina told me you were interested in the dog. Well, I saw it near the store, if it matters. Thank you, of course, for the clue, but the dog is already home." So he smiled and pointed to Roy, who was sitting under the table. "Wow, is that," said Matvey, but didn't finish his sentence because the surgeon interrupted him. Yes, it's a border collie. I checked on the internet, and now I know what kind of breed it is." "And you're just saying that?" Matvey asked in surprise. "What was I supposed to do? Dance with tambourines?" replied Sergei, laughing. "I don't know, but at least clarify the price of this breed," said Matvey cautiously. "Did you think I would sell him?" "No, he doesn't deserve such a fate, especially since Roy has a real owner. What do you mean? Matvey was surprised, his eyes narrowed. Did the homeless man survive? Timur Petrovich said that he died. Yes, that's right. That homeless man died of a cardiac arrest, Sergei answered. But Timur Petrovich will no longer do surgery until he realizes that it is necessary to save not only wealthy patients with lots of money, but also the homeless. After all, they are also people, only defenseless and powerless. I totally agree with you, Sergei. But wasn't that unnecessary with Timur Petrovich? No, it wasn't, Sergei answered sharply. And here's the thing, I talked to Dmitry Nikolaevich about you, and he agreed that it's time for you to be promoted. What does that mean? It means that after your promotion you'll take Timur Petrovich's place. But I can't take his job, said Matvey cautiously. And he won't be out of a job, Sergei answered calmly. Timur Petrovich will take the assistant's place. Let him learn how to do operations in order not to have to shamefully look for excuses. Yes, do you realize that that homeless man could have been saved, and he did not? You don't just get suspended for that, you go straight to jail. I understand. I won't ask any more stupid questions. Matvey waved his hands. Listen, I found a strange scar on Roy, Sergei continued. It looks like a knife wound. What do you think of that? Matvey approached the dog, who did not growl, though he was seeing it for the first time. Carefully lifting the fur, he looked closely at the scar and thoughtfully answered, I'll tell you even more. It's a hunting blade. Are you sure? Absolutely. My father was a hunter, and he always took a blade like this with him. Okay, so Roy was shot by a professional, not just a highwayman. You were right, he was aiming for the vital organs, but something or someone got in his way. Sergei pondered these words. Well, who would want to kill a dog? Are you sure you weren't going to sell it? Matvey asked again. No, I'll contact the owner and hand the dog over to him, Sergei answered affirmatively. Well, okay, then I'll go, said Matvey. I still have to go to the cottage. My wife asked me to fix the fence. And about the promotion, is it true or is it a joke? Have I ever made a joke, Matvey? No. So get ready, so you don't have to apologize for you later. Matvey left his apartment and Sergei looked at the dog and said, Roy, your master has been found. We did not know each other for a long time. The dog seemed to understand his words and whimpered softly. Leopold came to him without any fear and started howling. Both pets are crying so that tears came out of his eyes. Well, understand, I cannot leave you, he said, wiping his face with a kerchief. There's a phone number, bracelet and collar. It means you're not homeless. The cat came to his feet and lay down right on his slippers. Leo, don't trouble me. I can see that you like Roy. But let's wait to see what the owner has to say. After a couple of days, as planned, Sergei decided to call the dog's owner. His conscience would no longer allow him to keep someone else's pet locked up. He took a notebook with a phone number and typed the numbers on his cell phone and waited for an answer. There were 3 rings before a voice was heard, and it was a woman's voice. Yes, I'm listening. Hello, my name is Sergei Ivanovich, and I think I found your dog. Hello, joy was heard in the stranger's voice. And I'm Larisa Yurievna, and we really lost a dog. But it was 3 years ago. Are you sure it's him? Yes, of course, on the bracelet was written Roy and this phone number. Thank God that our Roy was found, said Larisa. I thought he was dead too. What do you mean dead? Sergei asked in astonishment. The point is, Larisa began to answer. 3 years ago, my husband was attacked by robbers. They took all the jewelry and money. From the wounds, Zhenya died. That evening, he was walking in the park with Roy, and I thought that the dog was also a victim of robbers. No, he's fine, Sergei replied. But I'll tell you more about it when I meet him. Yes, of course. Come. Larisa was pleased and gave him the address where he was to bring the dog. Sergei got dressed and went to the pet store and bought a leash. And when he came back, he saw his cat lying on Roy's paws. Leo, stop it. We have to go. The cat mewed pitifully and Sergei had to take him in his arms to calm him down. Leopold purred, then jumped to the floor and rubbed his back on Roy's fur. The dog responded by licking the cat a couple of times and wagging his tail. They seemed to have become real friends, and this separation was a real ordeal for them. The strange thing was that only a little time had passed, and they had managed to find a common language. Strange, of course, but in nature it seems, and not such things happen. Sergei looked at the dog again and said, "Come on, Roy, your mistress is waiting for you." Sergei attached a leash to him and took the dog down to the car. This time he decided to call a cab. While driving, he looked at Roy with wet eyes. That's how, just when you start to get used to a new friend and already need to part with him. Now I understand how animals feel when they are separated. 40 minutes later they arrived. Roy immediately barked happily. He recognized the place. Well, of course, he probably walked here more than once with the owner. Sergei went up to the 3rd floor and called the apartment. He heard footsteps and then the click of the lock being opened. "Hello again, Larisa Yurievna. Here is your pet," said Sergei, and handed her the leash in her hands. Roy threw himself on Larisa's neck and whimpered happily. The man looked at this scene with sadness. But you have to pull yourself together and admit that this is not your pet. He has his own owner. "Thank you, Sergei. I'm so glad you found Roy." "Thank you, Sergei. I am so glad you found Roy." "You are welcome, but I didn't find him. He came to us on his own," Sergei answered uncertainly. "I do not understand. Where did he go?" "I work as a surgeon in a clinic, and the dog came to the door himself. He was waiting for his master, as we thought at the time. I still don't understand how he could have another owner." Sergei told her how the dog ended up at the clinic. He did not hide the fact that he wanted to keep Roy. He also showed her the scar on his belly. "I found it when I was washing Roy." "God, what have they done to you?" Larisa cried and held the dog close to her. "Don't worry, the vital organs were not hurt," Sergei began to reassure her. "And what's interesting, someone cleverly treated the wound. It is fully healed and did not get inside the infection. It's good that Roy survived," Larisa continued. "My husband was a big businessman and owned a company that sold building materials. Maybe it was his competitors who killed him." "What about the business now? Did you sell it?" Sergei asked. No, it's a memory of Zhenya," Larisa answered with a shake of her head. "My husband's companion, Igor Borisovich, runs the business. He helps me with money, supports me. But he could have left everything and sold his share to other people. It is good that he did not turn away and helps me," said Sergei thoughtfully. At that moment, the doorbell rang again and Larisa, smiling, went to open it. "It's my son from school." While Larisa helped him take off his clothes, Sergei had time to analyze the situation. The hostess was now raising her son herself after the death of her husband. He owned a business, and now there is a companion who financially supports the family. But at the same time, something does not show that they live in prosperity. Sergei drew this conclusion by paying attention to the clothes Larisa was wearing and the modest furnishings in the apartment. By all appearances, the sums from the dead husband's companion are very, very modest. But that was none of his business. The main thing was that he brought the dog to its rightful owner. Finally, the dressing was finished, and a boy, who looked about 7 years old, came into the living room. "Say hello to Sergei Ivanovich Kirill." The boy held out his hand, and at that time Roy ran out of the kitchen. "Mom, did you find Roy?" Kirill shouted happily, forgetting to say hello. "No, son, Sergei Ivanovich did it. Thank you, very much." The boy thanked the surgeon and even hugged him. "Oh, come on. What's the big deal?" Sergei shyly replied. "I just did not pass by and felt sorry for the dog. I have a cat at home, so I also picked him up in the street." "What's his name?" Kirill asked. "You won't believe it, Leopold. Like in the cartoon." "Yes, that's right," Serge answered. "Well, Kirill, wash your hands and come to the table." Larisa intervened in the conversation. "Now we're going to treat Sergei Ivanovich to a berry pie." "Do you like strawberries?" "I adore them," Sergei answered. As a child, my mother and I used to pick them when we went to the forest. And with Dad, probably on a fishing trip. Joyfully asked Larissa, in order to keep the conversation going. No, he was a military man, and we used to go fishing with him more often than we were in the garrison. But I don't reproach him for it, because he did his duty and just did what he did best. By the way, you wouldn't believe it, but my cat became friends with Roy and wouldn't even let him go. You know, our cat Lisa was good to Roy. She was 12 years old when she left us for the rainbow. She loved Roy so much that she was heart to heart. When the dog heard what was being said about him, he ran up and started doing acrobatic numbers. He twisted on the floor, jumped up and wagged his tail in a bizarre way. Kirill was frolicking along with him, and he was the most excited about the return of his beloved friend. Well, let's go to the kitchen to eat a pie, Larissa commanded, and all together they sat down at the table. Sergei liked the pie very much and promised to take the recipe from the hostess in order to bake the same one at home. The dog kept hanging around Sergei, as if he did not want to let him go. Noticing this, Larissa suggested, "By the way, maybe tomorrow we will meet in the park. We will walk with Roy. It seems he will miss you. Igor Borisovich is just coming and will bring us the money. I'll introduce you to him and tell him how you saved our Roy." "Maybe we shouldn't do that," Sergei asked me cautiously. "No, you must tell Igor." Larissa stood her ground. "But let it be a surprise." "Well, okay, as you say," Sergei agreed. "Everything was delicious, but I have to go." "Yes, of course, I'll see you out," Larissa replied. Sergei quickly got dressed in the hallway and headed for the exit. "I will wait for you tomorrow. He'll be there for sure." Sergei called a cab again, and as he drove home he thought about why Larissa had kissed him. Had he made such an indelible impression on her? Indeed, she had not made him happy with a hot kiss for saving the dog, had she? A berry pie was enough to show her gratitude. Oddly enough, he must come to the park tomorrow to get to know her better. 3 years ago, Larissa became a widow, now 35 years old, and she was raising her son alone. Sergei juxtaposed the facts and pondered why she was not properly provided for. After all, if there was a business left over from her husband, it would have gone to her. As it was, it appeared to be run and seemingly owned by a companion. He should be asked why Larissa wasn't in the business. Sergei was going to do this in order to help the poor woman. On the way, Matvey called him and thanked him again for the good news about the promotion. It turned out that he had shared this with his wife, and she said that Sergei was their benefactor. "Thank you very much from her personally," said Matvey. All right, but don't tell anyone else." Sergei snapped at him. "Something wrong? Is there a problem?" I knew that Timur Petrovich already knew. "Yes, no, she doesn't know yet. I'll make him happy later, unless, of course, your wife spoils anything. You don't have to worry about that, I'll supervise it." "Okay, then the day after tomorrow I expect you in the office of the chief physician." At home, Sergei fed the cat, played with him to distract him, and then went to bed. At night he dreamt of Roy. The dog was standing by his bed and holding out his paw. It was as if he wanted to say hello. But then a dark figure appeared behind him, and the dog bellowed in rage. At that moment, Sergei woke up and stared into the darkness. He felt uncomfortable with the fact that he had seen such a dream. Could it be a sign? Lately it seemed to him that fate was giving him signals. If only he knew what they meant, thought Sergei, and could not understand what they were hinting at. In the morning he woke up before the alarm clock and decided to thoroughly prepare for the date. What else could it be called when a woman openly invites him for a walk in the park? Naturally, it was a date. That's all, only Sergei had to organize it. Well, come on, in the situation in which he found himself, it was not so easy to figure out what to do. It turned out that he was assigned a place and time to meet, with no right to refuse. Sergei began to get ready, having first kicked the car out of the garage. And while it was warming up under the windows, he put the finishing touches on it. Suddenly the phone rang. "Yes, Larissa, I'm listening. You know, it would be better if you came to my place first, and then we'll go to the park," she answered with a hint of sadness in her voice. Do you have a change of plans? Shall we postpone the walk then? No, no. Igor Borisovich is always in a hurry and has no time to meet in the park, as usual. Besides, he has no time to pass the money there for everyone to see. I don't understand your benefactor, said Sergei, but if he's such a shy and fearful man, let's wait for him in your apartment. Yes, that would be better. But don't be offended, Sergei, Larissa said guiltily. I have nothing to be offended about. Everything is fine, he answered calmly. An hour later he was there, again looking at the familiar windows. He did not see any other cars in the yard, and that meant that Igor Borisovich hadn't arrived yet. Well, he had time to talk to Larissa. Going up to her apartment, he was surprised to see the door slightly closed. Larissa, I'm here. You have an open door. Yes, come in. I'll be right there. Her voice sounded from the bathroom. Sergei smiled to himself and remembered yesterday's kiss. So it is, which brings beauty. And involuntary tenderness only confirmed that Larissa had a liking for him. It was necessary not to lose face and show that he was a courteous and polite man. The bathroom door opened, and Larissa appeared with her beautiful hair, bright eyes, and a languid smile. Hello, Sergei. Hello, Larissa, you look great. Thank you, that's nice to hear, she replied. Now Igor Borisovich is coming, and I'll introduce you. Sergei nodded in agreement, and immediately Kirill ran out of the living room to meet him, followed by Roy. The boy and his dog whirled around Sergei. They seemed to enjoy his presence. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Well, it seems that Igor Borisovich has arrived, said Larissa and went to open it. Hearing a rude male voice, Why are you, Larissa Yurievna, somehow suddenly put me before the fact. Come on, I just wanted to introduce you to someone very interesting. All right, but only for a short time, otherwise I'm in a hurry. Igor Borisovich answered and walked into the living room right in his shoes. Sergei met his gaze and everything inside him went cold. The so-called companion radiated some unhealthy energy. During his work as a surgeon, Sergei had been able to communicate with many people, and now some of them could look so that it was scary. Hello, my name is Igor Borisovich. He held out his hand to the surgeon. Hello, and I'm Sergei Ivanovich, he answered. What kind of person are you, with whom Larissa so zealously wanted to introduce me? I returned something to her that she didn't expect, said Sergei. I wonder what? Igor Borisovich asked sneeringly. I, for example, bring money. Then he took out a skinny envelope from his jacket pocket and threw it on the table. Here, this is help for Larissa Yurievna. Igor Borisovich, isn't that not enough? Sergei asked with a furrowed brow. Yes, what do you allow yourself? Resented him. And in general, who are you? Okay, I repeat, I gave Larissa back the most expensive. And what is that, may I ask? Igor Borisovich grinned. Look, Sergei answered, and brought Roy from the room. As soon as the dog saw Igor Borisovich, he immediately roared. It seems that he does not like you. Sergei looked intently at the guest, while all he did was gulp air with his mouth. It can't be, it can't be. Igor Borisovich began to stammer. Would somebody explain to me what's going on here? Larissa intervened. Sure, only now Igor Borisovich will stop stuttering and tell us everything. Won't he? Yes, yes, I will tell everything. I will confess to everything. The benefactor screamed. What do you want to confess? Larissa asked perplexedly. Come on, there is no way that the dog is still alive. Igor Borisovich began to speak. What do you mean? Larissa interrupted him. It means that I killed him 3 years ago. He couldn't survive. He let out the last phrase, and Roy growled at him even more. After that, Igor Borisovich had a fit. He began to talk nonsense and called the dog a ghost. The surgeon was shocked by what he heard here. Such a surprise, and I thought I had strange dreams the night before. What do you mean, Sergei? Larissa cautiously asked, putting her hands on his shoulders. I'm trying to figure it out myself, replied the surgeon and called the police. The policeman came in 10 minutes. drew up a report and took Igor Borisovich away. After some time, he came to his senses and was able to give truthful testimony. It turned out that on the day Eugene was taking a quiet walk in the park with his dog, several people were waiting for him in the bushes. They had been hired by a companion in order to get his hands on the business. The hired thugs killed Evgeny with several precise blows. Igor Borisovich himself tried to get rid of the dog, who was desperately struggling to protect his owner. He was the one who stabbed Roy in the belly with a knife, but in the commotion the dog managed to crawl away behind a tree. It was dark and no one went looking for him. The question arose, how had Roy survived such an injury? And that's when it turned out that he had been picked up by a homeless man, Arkady. He used to work as an assistant surgeon in one of the hospitals in the city, and interestingly enough, he had Timur Petrovich in charge. This ubiquitous and conniving doctor did not like Arkady, and made so that he was punished and kicked out of the hospital. But this did not seem enough. Timur Petrovich had a hand in ensuring that Arkady was not taken to any medical institution. The former assistant began to drink slowly. It came to the point that he lost the meaning of life, and soon he lost his home and found himself on the street. And here he began a new ordeal, the test of survival. No one who knew him recognized him, and even if they did, they simply pretended to be an unfamiliar homeless person. Arkady was sinking lower and lower until he was at the very bottom of life. On that vindictive evening, he was collecting empty bottles to turn in and buy himself some bread. As soon as he heard the strange commotion and shouting, Arkady almost crawled to the place. From behind the bushes, he saw a man lying on the ground, a dark spot beneath him. The lanterns did not illuminate the paths in the park, but Arkady immediately smelled blood. He had been involved in operations so many times that he would never, ever mistake that smell. The noise and screaming subsided. It looked like the man lying on the ground was dead. And then the dog came crawling toward him, his belly bleeding. Arkady tore open his t-shirt and bandaged the wound. He took the dog in his arms and left the scene, afraid to call the police, who would have put him behind bars. In the den where he occasionally dwelt, a homeless man took the dog out and saved his life. But he soon needed help himself. He had a heart attack not far from the clinic where Timur Petrovich worked. Arkady managed to get to the porch, but he didn't have the strength for more. That was how the nurse found him, and when Arkady came to Timur Petrovich for an examination, his fate was sealed. The surgeon recognized him as his former assistant, and afraid that he would tell everything, made sure that Arkady would not survive. And if it were not for the dog, no one would have known who died in their clinic. Well, Sergei Ivanovich would have grumbled, but no one would have told him the truth anyway. So he would have thought that he was just an ordinary bum who had no money, no house, no family. Igor Borisovich confessed that he and his associates saw a homeless man running out of the park, holding a large roll in his hands. And what is interesting, a tail was sticking out of it, but then they thought that the homeless man caught a cat and took it to his place. All this truth was revealed in the course of the investigation. Igor Borisovich did not deny that he ordered the murder of his companion. Upon learning this, Larissa almost went into hysterics, and it is good that with her there was Sergei. He drove her to the hospital, so they gave her all the necessary medical care. The investigators prepared irrefutable evidence for the court. Igor Borisovich and his accomplices were to face the most severe punishment. Meanwhile, the lawyers who had once worked for Larissa's late husband were able to re-register the business in her name. As a result, everything passed into the hands of the rightful owner. Larissa could now manage the money herself and deny herself and her son nothing. At the same time, she could not help but thank Sergei for his help. But before that, the surgeon finally dealt with Timur Petrovich. He talked to the chief doctor, and he fired the wrongdoing employee. At the same time, police officers took him into custody. It turned out that there were witnesses who were ready to show at the investigation how Timur Petrovich framed Arkady and how he sent him to the other world. Larissa and Sergei had their first date in the park. They took a long walk, talked about life, and shared their plans. You know, I think it was fate that brought us together, Larissa confessed and snuggled up to Sergei. I think so too, and I hope it will last, Sergei answered, and looked at Kirill, who was walking beside them, holding Roy on his leash. From the outside, it seemed like a real family, but Sergei and Larissa were only at the beginning of their journey. They still had many tests to pass and, first and foremost, a test of their feelings. Soon Larissa had to plunge completely into business. She learned the basics of economics and marketing. Sergei helped her in this as much as he could, while continuing to save patients in his native clinic. They did not forget about Arkady and found his grave. It turned out that he was buried with the usual license plate. Sergei took his time and picked up Larissa to go to the cemetery together. Kirill also volunteered to honor the homeless old man with them. "Mom, take me. I want to put flowers on his grave." "Well, all right, son," agreed Larissa. No matter how you look at it, but he was the one who saved Roy. And if he hadn't taken the risk that night, the dog wouldn't have survived. At the cemetery, while Larissa and her son were laying flowers on the grave, Sergei met with the director of the funeral parlor and agreed about the monument. "I ask you, make it so that the dog was drawn on the stone," asked the surgeon. "I see that this is important to you." The director nodded. "We will do everything in the best way." Soon there was a marble tombstone on Arkady's grave instead of a license plate. Now we could say that he was buried with all the honors. Larissa even prepared a memorial dinner for the occasion. "That's good. We gave him a decent send-off. A good memory to a good man." "Yes, you're right. He really was a good man." Soon it became known that the investigators made full use of Timur Petrovich. They dug up on him additional episodes in which he directly or indirectly took part. In the end, the former surgeon had so many sins that the investigators were more than enough to send him to prison for many years. With Sergei's protection, Matvey took his place. As he promised, the promising assistant was given the opportunity to climb the career ladder and fully reveal his professional abilities. The chief physician approved Sergei's request, and Matvey became the hospital's #2 surgeon. Together, they set up a schedule of accepting patients regardless of their status or financial situation. Sergei decided to be modest and consistent in his relationships with Larissa. He did not want to rush events and drive his beloved to action. It was necessary to prepare the ground first so that he could build on it later. And the first thing to do was to introduce Larissa to his parents. On the weekend, they all came together to the countryside. That is where Galina Nikolaevna and Ivan Maximovich lived. As soon as they saw their son's chosen one, their faces lit up. My mother accompanied Larissa into the house, but my father offered Sergei to sit on the bench. "Well, my son, confess, how did you manage to get hold of such a woman at the age of 40? "Dad, my age has nothing to do with it," Sergei answered. "For love, it doesn't matter who's older or younger. And it is true, I am 5 years older than your mother, and we still live together." His father patted him on the shoulder. "The main thing is to have feelings. Without them, nothing will work." "We are testing our feelings now," admitted Sergei. "While we're dating, we take our time and get to know each other. We don't want to rush into things, so we don't make any mistakes." "You're right on the money here, son," my father said. "I wooed Galina for 3 years, gave her flowers, invited her to the club, read her poems. Dad, were you into poetry?" "No, I took the classics and reworked them a bit," Dad smiled. "But you cannot," jokingly wagged his finger Sergei. "Oh, son, if only you understood that poetry and didn't ask unnecessary questions." "And did it succeed in making an impression?" Sergei asked, squinting his left eye. "I bet it did. You came into the world," laughed his father and dragged him into the house. Larissa definitely appealed to Sergei's parents. They saw her as a homely and kind woman, and they did not care at all that Larissa owned a business and had a child. The main thing was that there was sympathy between them, and then God willing. At least with the other woman, they did not see their son. He had been alone for so many years after his divorce from Olga. After meeting Sergei's parents, it was time for Larissa to show her mother and father her man. They had prepared for this meeting even more carefully. Sergei understood where he was going, so in advance he got all the information from Larisa about what they liked and did not like. But it turned out to be very simple. Tatiana Viktorovna and Yuri Dmitrievich took their daughter's choice as a sign of fate. They all prayed that a worthy man would come into her life. For 3 years they kept silent, understanding that Evgeny's death was a mental trauma for Larisa, and she would have to come to her senses before she decided to start a new relationship. And so when that day came, they decided not to miss the opportunity to give guidance. Her mother tried the hardest. She told Larisa that relationships should be strong and reliable. If even once there was a doubt or a crack in it, there would be trouble. Larisa's father was practically unanimous with her. He asked his daughter to be steadfast in overcoming all difficulties. The only thing left was to join forces and find common ground. And it was more about the relationship between Sergei and Larisa's son. The man decided to go all the way, and so he began to look for approaches to Kirill. He drove him to school himself and also picked him up. And once, when the boy said he was being bullied there, he volunteered to take care of it all. "Let me try," he offered Larisa. "Well, okay, but don't overdo it," she agreed. At school, Sergei talked to the principal and found out that he had been bullied by a boy from the 5th grade. I had to meet his parents to find a solution. It turned out that the mother of this careless schoolboy was one of Sergei's former patients. She apologized to Kirill and promised that she would do everything possible to talk sense into her son. And it was not an isolated incident when Sergei helped Kirill. Together, they would go to the countryside. In his free time, the surgeon organized picnics. Larisa liked the way Sergei interacted with her son. She thought it would be different and once commented on the subject. "I am surprised at how Kirill became friends with you so quickly." "You don't forget who I work for," Sergei jokingly replied. "Well, you have patients there. Their lives depend on your actions," Larisa remarked. "What does that have to do with it?" Sergei asked in astonishment. He also asks. Larisa rounded her eyes. "So they will treat you well, so you won't make any medical mistakes." "I have never had any." "Sorry, I didn't mean to say that." Larisa apologized to him. "But you get the point, right?" "Well, of course, but I don't think that's the case here." Their relationship grew stronger every day. Soon Sergei made her an official proposal. It happened in a restaurant where they came to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the company. All the staff of the company celebrated the party. There were parents and employees present. And there, standing on one knee, accompanied by a waterfall of rose petals, Sergei proposed to Larisa to marry him. "I want to hear from you just 2 words." There was silence in the hall. Larisa looked down at Sergei and smiled. "I agree," sounded her answer. Everyone present at the event shouted bitterly. Larisa and Sergei kissed and did not let each other out of their arms for several minutes. They were happy because the love tested by the trials brought them together. Sergei proved that he could be a good husband to her and a caring father to Kirill. Larisa, in turn, accepted his advances and reciprocated. The wedding took place a month later. By that time, Larisa was already pregnant. They did not wait for official registration as they were sure of their feelings. Sergei told her that he wanted another child. Discussing his future plans and his maternity leave, Larisa suggested that he take a management course and move to her company to take the director's position. But Sergei declined, saying that the clinic was the best place for him to work. He was more useful here than anywhere else. After a while, they began to discuss whose apartment they would live in, and then the idea of buying a large house in the country came up. Larisa wanted to invest the money from the business, but Sergei suggested another option. "We will sell our apartments and buy a house." Larisa approved of his decision, and while the documents were being dealt with, Sergei moved in with Leopold to live with her for a while. Roy saw his friend and attacked him with all his might. The cat was taken aback by this reception, but reciprocated. They spent more and more time together, finding new games and activities. Roy got used to Sergei and saw him as the head of the family. Sergei bought him food and took him to the vet if he needed it. He also chose times to take him for walks. The dog knew what time Sergei was coming and would shake him at the doorstep. Soon everything was settled with the apartments and they moved out of town. A house was found on the shore of a lake. Larissa longed to live in nature, breathe fresh air, and gather the gifts of the forest. Sergei did not deny himself fishing and got Kirill used to it. All four of them, the cat, the dog, he and the son, went to the lake. They had a good spot there. Sergei showed them how to cast a fishing rod and hook a fish. 3 months later, Larissa and Sergei already knew they were having a baby girl. So much joy came into their family that words cannot express. Kirill was especially excited when he found out that his parents were going to give him a little sister. "You know, Mom, Dad, why didn't I make her a crib myself?" "Of course, that's good, son, but we'd better buy one," Larissa answered, realizing that at this age her son would only be able to make a slingshot, and that not at the first attempt. Larissa was getting ready for the birth, slowly ennobling the children's room. At the same time, Sergei was told the news, which he almost lost the power of speech. The head doctor of the clinic went to work in a major medical center, and in his place put a promising surgeon. And of course that it was Sergei. Other options simply could not be. In addition, he was responsible for all processes in the clinic. Luck smiled on Matvey as well. He took Sergei's place. Now he had more opportunities. However, he also had to perform much more complicated tasks.